Alien 3 is one of the most discussed movies of the saga. It is also the one with more problems during production, with creative teams coming and going. But there was a director that proposed a point of view so original as it was miscomprehended. Today we will explore the story behind an alternative version of Alien 3, directed by Vincent Ward. Premiered in 1979, Alien combined horror and science fiction and took these two genres to another level. The audience was terrified by the story about Nostromo's crew being victims of an outer space murderer, a film that became unique due to the direction of Ridley Scott, the screenplay of Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett, and the creature design by H.R. Giger. Plus, it took off Sigourney Weaver's career and presented one of the most emblematic monsters in cinema. This happened all over again when Aliens premiered. James Cameron changed the suggestive style of the first movie for action and war, with Marines fighting off a horde of creatures. Cameron also developed the character Ripley and expanded the universe. The monsters were now scientifically known as Xenomorphs. That commercial and artistic success on both movies established a franchise that the 20th Century Fox wanted to keep exploring. But Alien 3 was a very difficult project. On September 1987, producers Walter Hill, David Giler, and Gordon Carroll from the Brandywine Company wrote a treatment and hired scriptwriter William Gibson, pioneer in cyberpunk literature thanks to his novel Neuromancer. The author had only 2 months to write the story due to an imminent screenwriter strike. The story took place after Aliens. Ripley, Newt, Hicks, and Bishop, survivors from the last film, arrived at a space station that functions as a shopping center, controlled by the Union of Progressive Peoples. This time, the real protagonist is Hicks, who has to fight off the creatures and confront an obscure military initiative that wants to turn them into weapons. Meanwhile, Ripley remains in a coma for the majority of the story. It combined elements of action and the Cold War, but Fox executives weren't totally conformed. In spite of the doubts, there were plans of leaving loose ends to make more sequels. In 1988, they called Finnish director Renny Harlin, who had just triumphed with A Nightmare on Elm Street 4. Harlin planned on making a film set in the planet of the aliens or with them invading Earth. When the screenwriter's strike came to an end, Gibson was offered the opportunity to rewrite the material alongside the director, but the author refused and abandoned the project. In 2018, Gibson's screenplay was adapted into a comic for Dark Horse Publisher, and as an audiobook. By Harlan's suggestion, Brandywine's executives contacted Eric Red, who had written The Hitcher and Near Dark. The new screenwriter had 2 months to complete the first draft, where he set the story on a space colony characterized like the United States Midwest. The protagonist was Sam Smith, a soldier who had survived the Xenomorphs but had to fight aliens and other animal hybrids. None of those involved in the project liked the script. It changed too many aspects of the mythology and got rid of leading characters. Red himself never thought of the text as its own. He actually referred to it as a, quote, piece of junk. By 1989, another screenwriter showed up, David Twohy. The plan was to pick up Gibson's concepts. However, the Cold War ended that same year, and it was necessary to take another direction. Twohy presented the idea about a prison planet where convicts underwent a series of illegal tests. Once again, the script wasn't well received, starting with Ripley's absence. Twohy had to rewrite it to incorporate the heroine, whilst Fox offered Weaver a contract that, besides giving her a higher salary, gave her control as co-producer. Tired of many twists, Harlin took a step back. However, he had left a positive image in the studio, so Fox hired him to direct The Adventures of Ford Fairlane and Die Hard 2. In view of all of this, Hill, Giler, and Carroll stopped everything and tried to find a fresh vision, original, far from Hollywood. As a result, they found Vincent Ward from New Zealand. Born in 1956, Ward studied fine arts at the University of Canterbury in Christchurch, where he started shooting short films. In 1980, he was highly praised in film festivals for his documentary In Spring One Plants Alone. His debut feature was Vigil from 1984, about a young girl on a remote farm. The powerful images and pictorial composition earned Ward the recognition of a promising talent. Promises were met in 1988, when The The Navigator, A Medieval Odyssey premiered. The story about a group of expeditioners from the 14th century that made it to the present premiered in the Cannes Film Festival and left the audience breathless. Then came more festivals and fanatics. The critics praised Ward as a visionary and a role model for filmmakers. In Vigil, as well as in The Navigator, Ward showed the relationship of the characters with their environments, without leaving out the cultural clashes that implied, a concern that can be related to his own vision of the world. New Zealand is essentially a rural country. One of those people impressed by The Navigator was Walter Hill. He was the one who had discovered Ridley Scott for Alien. Therefore, when he picked Ward to direct Alien 3, Giler and Carroll agreed right away. But tracking down Ward was hard. He had set out on a long trip to the Canadian Arctic to do research for his next project, Map of the Human Heart. He visited places and talked to locals, but his savings were running out and had to come back. He was so broke that he had to move to a tiny apartment in Australia. All his financial problems would be solved if he accepted what Hollywood was offering. However, he thought he wasn't ready for those projects and wasn't interested in any of them. When Hill was able to contact Ward's agent, the answer from the director was also negative. Far from giving up, Hill continued calling several times, promising it was a great opportunity, and sent him Tui's script. The director hated it. When everything seemed lost for Brandywine, Ward's agent intervened. He explained to his client that he was acting crazy. He couldn't afford to deny such a lucrative film. He told him to think about his future. Ward looked around at his very uncomfortable apartment and thought he didn't have anything to lose, but he accepted with the condition to find an original story. Brandywine gave him the green light to create a new script. The idea came to him during a flight to Los Angeles. On the one hand, he had studied Alien and Aliens, and concluded that both films' charm lied on the fact that Scott and Cameron had managed to give the films their personal vision. He wanted to do the same. On the other hand, he had published the book Edge of the Earth: Stories and Images from the Antipodes, containing medieval landscape paintings, one of his greatest obsessions. And a third influence came from Hieronymus Bosch's paintings, starting with the Garden of Earthly Delights. By the time the plane landed, Ward already had a story set on a wooden satellite, inhabited by monks, without any technology. In that context, Ripley and the creature would appear, an idea that sounded odd, but that Hill, Giler, and Carroll enjoyed. In the meantime, Tui kept writing drafts for Alien 3 and only found out about Ward and Fasano working on it through rumors. When he met with Fox executives, they told him that they were working on the fourth part of the saga. Tui didn't believe them and quit. Years later, while working as a director, he could use many of his ideas on Pitch Black. In that movie, Vin Diesel plays the role of Riddick, a science-enhanced prisoner who fights off hordes of monsters that ambush from the dark. Fasano's first 110-page draft was finished on March 29, 1990. It was good enough for getting the go-ahead from Fox with a budget of $40 million. Next step was hiring production designer Norman Reynolds, who had worked on the first Star Wars trilogy and in other Hollywood blockbusters. He was in charge of making sketches of the shocking images created by the director. Fasano's text, based on Ward's concept, starts with a quote from Herman Hesse's novel Narcissus and Goldmund. But how will you ever die one day, Narcissus, if you have no mother? You can't live without a mother. Without a mother, you can't die. Following that, from the point of view of Brother John, one of the monks, we start getting to know that microcosmos. Arcean, a space station made out of wood and glass, with a metal structure in its center. A Pacific setting which includes cornfields, a cathedral on construction, a lake, and a roof painted as the sky, with large windows to let the sunlight in. Brother John and his dog, Mathis, are by the lake when they notice a celestial light coming in closer. Every monk watches as the comet closes in, until it lands on the lake. There, they discovered it is Sulaco, the ship from Aliens. On the inside, they find Ripley asleep in a hypersleep capsule and the remains of Newt's clothes. Through a recorded message, we find out that Sulaco was attacked by xenomorphs that killed Hicks and Bishop. Once awakened, Ripley realizes that the lack of technology in Arcean will make it impossible to communicate with the outside. She also warns the monks about the possible presence of an outer space threat. Abbott, the community leader, doesn't believe her, accuses her of implanting lies and of the possible murder of Newt, and locks her up. But soon after, Brother John and another monk face an alien sheep mutation and manage to kill it with fire. Ripley is tried for having brought evil to the community and is incarcerated in a dungeon. There she meets Anthony, an android that ended up in there after the monks realized his true self. Meanwhile, monks are being killed by a xenomorph and panic spreads in that once peaceful community. Brother John, who never doubted Ripley, frees her to help them fight the beast. She refuses at first as it seems hopeless, but changes her mind. He also frees Anthony and the three of them look for weapons. As the story keeps developing, we learn two truths about Arcean. First, it was created as a political prison for people who had started an anti-technology movement, created after a powerful computer virus devastated Earth. The other truth about Arcean is that it was built to eventually collapse, sort of a prolonged death sentence for prisoners. In the third act, there are pursuits and death on the cornfield, and also fires that put the oxygen in the atmosphere at risk. Ripley, Brother John, and Anthony plan on escaping in the Sulaco. On their way to achieve this, they cross paths with more xenomorphs that even infect the abbot. The android dies in battle and there's a violent encounter at the library, leaving just Ripley and Brother John alive. However, she realizes that she has an alien in her organism. The monk performs some sort of exorcism on her, and the creature emerges from her mouth to get into John, who prefers to remain there and die in the flames along with Arcean. Ripley escapes in the ship alongside Mathis, leaving leads that make you think about the dog having a creature inside. Ward wanted to add a parallelism with Christian iconography to the film: the star, the godsent, and the demonic presence. He also confessed he wanted to get rid of Newt because he found her annoying and wanted to explore Ripley's sense of loss. By the mid-1990s, sets were built in the Pinewood Studios in London. Lebbeus Woods, a prestigious architect and artist, was the one in charge of the designs. There were also meetings with Giger, who seemed to mistrust the director, and so casting began. For the main monks, Ward had John Cleese and Michael Palin in mind, from comedy troupe Monty Python. However, neither Brandywine nor Fox were sure about the script, which had several plot holes. They kept wondering, how could there be a wooden satellite? Besides, the sudden xenomorph's appearance made no sense. Weaver also doubted about the turn of the story and of her character. To make it worse, the budget started to rise. Fearing a possible failure, the studio sent Ward a series of changes to stay on the budget and to clarify some storyline details. One of them was to transform that space monastery into a mining community, but Ward denied every request from the studio. Meanwhile, Fox turned to Fasano to rewrite the script. Those disagreements led to a meeting between Ward and the executives. As he didn't want to compromise his vision, he had to take a step back from the project. Very sad news for the team that appreciated the director's passion for his work. Without wasting any time, Fox rewrote the script and hired David Fincher, a very well-known director nowadays, but back then, he was a young man coming from working on commercials and video clips. The chaotic shooting of Alien 3 deserves another video, but it's interesting to watch the finished product and see how Ward's ideas survived, which is the reason he appears in the credits as author of the story. The prisoners of this version are very similar to Ward's monks. There are religious connotations, the character of Clemens has elements from Brother John, and a very important idea remained. Ripley had a monster in her insides. Ward got paid for his work and invested in Map of the Human Heart. He also directed films like What Dreams May Come with Robin Williams, but he dedicated most of his time in his paintings. After watching Alien 3, he was sad that only a few aspects were left from his ambitious project. In time, his vision was so legendary that he got several offers to shoot the script, but far from the Alien universe. He rejected the offers, stating that his ideas only worked with the Xenomorph, and that at some point it influenced the saga. Alien 3, directed by Vincent Ward, not only became a movie that was never made from that franchise, but also a great incomplete project in cinema.